Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers. Brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durrag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land that this podcast was created on.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another rousing, stimulating, beautiful, wonderful episode of Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, because sometimes we feel like prose and sometimes we feel like cons. I'm here today joined by the beautiful, wonderful, I just wanted to rattle off more adjectives again, and I was going to say
Which one of us is
stimulate.
beautiful and
Yeah,
wonderful?
you have to
This
insult
is such a
us.
cliffhanger.
I was going to say stimulating again. James Healy.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. That's a wonderful introduction. Hello, I'm James Healy. I'm a writer of horror and science fiction. I'm also a freelance editor, and I'm known for Cooling Engines, which was my contribution to the new Mythic anthology, which we published in 2022.
Correct. Those are true facts.
Yes.
We also have the bodacious.
Go on.
I'm just trying to think of.
Bodacious.
I want to say the same adjectives, but I'm trying to think of different adjectives.
Iridescent.
Totally true.
Iridescent, ephemeral, equally stimulating. Paddy Boylan.
I write a bunch of stuff. Now I'm a technical writer, editor, creative writing teacher, mostly creative writing teacher these days. I absolutely love teaching writing.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm Phoenix Rig. Founder of Bent Light Writing. It's an editing house. We partner with some publishing houses around Australia and other places of the world. And starting September, I will be an English teacher. I just got a job at a place here in the town I'm living in Spain, and I'm gonna be starting at the start of term. I'll be an English teacher here, so very excited about that. Today, I'm gonna start us off with a quote. This is by J.R.R. Tolkien, which I just found out his name stands for, or his full name is John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. And he says, many people apply it, referring to the ring, to the nuclear bomb, don't they? That the thing that was in my mind is holding some allegory of it. Well, it isn't. And today we will be addressing the topic of allegory versus application. That is the thing the author actually had in their mind when they were writing the book, what they were trying to get across, if there was even anything they were deliberately trying to get across in the first place, versus the reader's application of that book to their own personal world, whatever they have going on in their mind. It's an immense discussion. If you Google allegory versus application, you'll find many, many articles right off the bat. If you Google, think of a book. I tried it with Alice in Wonderland before the podcast. You could try that. If you just insert name of book or movie and type in allegory, you'll find, again, many, many articles, discussions, contradictory things about what it means, what it's about. Most of people taking stabs at what it means. And it's usually very hard to find the author's actual take on what it means. Today on the podcast, I'd like to basically give an introductory to the discourse. So if you're not familiar with the discourse, you could this is an on-ramp into the discourse to kind of make you aware of it. And so you could join the talk, share some experiences. And I also want to break down I do think there are some pitfalls that especially early writers can fall into if they're not aware of this phenomenon. Because it doesn't just include things like theme and message, but there are some other things that readers generate in their mind when reading something that they don't realize they're creating in their mind when they then go to write something. So I want to kind of break some of that down, which I think is valuable. So another quote from Tolkien here that I just think kicks it off really nicely. So this was from an interview that J.R.R. Tolkien did with BBC back in the day on a what's it called? A segment called Writers and Wordsmiths. He said, people do not fully understand the difference between an allegory and an application. You can go to a Shakespearean play and you could apply it to things in your mind if you like, but they aren't allegories. At least most of them aren't. So I'd like to kick things off, throwing it over to you guys. Do either of you have any examples of a book or something you've read, a show, something you've watched, anything where you just took something away that you were so certain, like this, whatever it was, this was it, like that thing was so about this, and then you just maybe later found out, oh, that's not what the author meant at all.
So I remember you sending this message out beforehand to get us thinking about it, and I found myself really struggling, and I realized that was because I almost always tried to avoid ever finding out what it was the author meant by the story, because I really believe in the idea that whatever the audience takes away from it, I kind of think it might be this phrase, the death of the author, that where that comes from is that once the author has put the story out there, whatever the reader, whatever the audience takes away from the story, that's what it was about to them. I can think of a bunch of examples of where I came away with one interpretation and someone else came away with a radically different interpretation. And I really enjoy having those conversations with people about stories. And I feel like if anyone's ever able to walk in with, well, this is what the author meant, it stifles that conversation because then everyone suddenly becomes wrong in their interpretation. So yeah, I'm afraid I can't give an example of walking away thinking one thing and then finding out that the author meant something else, because I only ever come across what the author intended by accident. If I happen to be reading a foreword that they've put in a book and they've said that this is what they wanted, or if they've had to, sometimes authors have to address controversy and things like this, and they may end up being like, look, this is what that meant. It didn't mean what everyone is arguing about over here.
Yeah. No, that's good. And that's a big part of today's conversation.
Brilliant. Okay.
Funny you should say that you don't want to know what the author intended because that might invalidate everyone's understanding. I mean, I don't. Would it though? Like,
I don't think,
see them as two different.
I don't think it would invalidate it. I just think that it's. I think your own interpretation is more valuable. This is what I think. Yeah.
I think there's room for both. I mean, I like the idea that the meaning exists somewhere between the author's original intention and the intention of the audience. And I kind of like that there's these two. I mean, like Phoenix, you mentioned Lord of the Rings, and like I think everyone's thinking Lord of the Rings. I've never actually heard that the ring could be a metaphor for the atomic bomb. I've heard that classic thing of it's about World War One, obviously. It's obviously about World War One. Tolkien famously said, no, it's not. Stop making the comparison. It's not. But if everyone thinks it was, and everyone gets that from it, and the author, lived through World War One, like, is it not? I tried to find, I remember hearing some quote that I swear to God was by Kurt Vonnegut Jr., but I looked it up and I couldn't find it. But it's something like the author doesn't always really know what their work is about. And on to say that, like, an author can have an idea of what their work is about, and the author can think that's what the work is about, but they're not the one that owns the meaning. They were just the ones that wrote the words. I think there's something kind of powerful to that. Thinking back to Tolkien, like, it might be about World War One, and he just, it shaped everything. He didn't consciously have it in his mind, but that's where all the pieces are pointing. That was a very rambly way of saying that, but I hope that makes some sense.
No, it does. And honestly, I think I know for me personally, well, I don't know if I've had such a profound experience with this, but I could see it happening, and I think it's happened in small degrees, where at the onset of writing a story versus at the end of writing a story, the story will mean something fully different to me, and it will, or like even after the story is finished, it can then later mean something different to me. I'm like, oh, that's what the story's about, and it's like I didn't even know that at the time of writing it or whatever, but it's totally about that. Like I see that now. And it is an organic shifting thing, or it can be an organic shifting thing, even for the author, I feel, to an extent.
That's so funny to me because I always start out with such a firm idea of what my stories are about. Like I think I always write to a concept. And it sounds very freeing to not, but yeah, I've always got this like guiding, like this is what it's going to be about, which is real pretentious, but that's what I do.
That was actually going to be another question of mine is, do you write with a message in mind? Do you enjoy writing with a message in mind, or do you find a message along the way, or do you try to just capture an organic sort of snapshot of the world of people and let messages be what they are?
I can speak to that at the moment, just with the story that I'm working on for our next anthology. I definitely started that with a message, an idea, and a theme in mind, and first couple of drafts of the story just felt really stiff and I really struggled with them. And I wrote it to a place where I was right, that's happy, I have that all in place, and that's a story beginning, middle, and end. It's not great, but I can work on it more as we start to edit through it. And I left it down for a while, and I came back to it, and I kind of decided to rework the theme in particular. And I just abandoned the original idea because I felt like the story that I had written, the narrative that I had written, didn't fit the theme that I had originally tried to fit it into in the character arc. And I'm editing it now, and I'm feeling way, way better about it. And I feel like the new theme and what the character is going through just fits the narrative so much better, and it's something I'm a lot more interested in.
Can you tell us what the old theme and the new theme are / what?
I could say
if you want to
yeah,
share,
I guess I won't
Yeah.
say exactly what the theme is, but I guess I suppose I was kind of playing audience plays as a part in the story, and I guess the idea of who you are before an audience. And I think I had the character's arc and what he was doing and what he was struggling with wasn't really lining up with what was meant to be the struggle of this theme. The two things weren't aligning. So I kind of took a step back and I said, well, what is it he ends up doing in the course of the story? And then I said, well, let's try to align the theme more closely to that. Which just feels so much better now. I'm coming back and I'm looking at all these little points in the story, which were initially just things that happened. And now I'm like, right, that's obviously an important moment there, and that's important there. Getting his emotions clear throughout the story. I just feel much more comfortable about it and much better with it. But that was an example of finding the theme I'd written a number of drafts before I'd gotten there. And I find usually finding the theme later on in the story, once the story is in place, I think makes me feel a lot more comfortable about how the story feels in the end.
That's so interesting, because for me, I always use theme as the guiding star. I like science fiction. I like things that are about something and have a message. And I always start with an idea of like, what am I trying to say and explore with this, and write around it. I kind of love the idea of it being like free to just write and see where it takes you, but that's just not my practice. I don't know.
I think there's an important distinction to make here as well, because there is a difference, like with science fiction as well. Something Ellie called out, which I think she nailed it. So she hit the nail right on the head with this one. Back in her episode on the fantasy deeper dive, where she made the distinction between what fantasy seeks to do and what sci-fi seeks to do. Fantasy being in conversation with religion and myth, and sci-fi being in conversation with technology and philosophy. There is, because like for my what I wrote for the anthology and what I'm writing for the new anthology, there are philosophies I'm playing with, and I do have to have those firmly in mind, because without those I wouldn't be able to write it, because they are the guiding star. They're kind of what I'm using as a discussion point. I guess another distinction to make for Allegory, and I read this, I forget the article exactly, but this was an article that was talking about the interview, or talking about Tolkien specifically. But it was talking about how Allegory can more so be that there is an exact one-to-one parallel between something in the real world and something in the book. So like in the case of Tolkien, the ring is an allegory for the nuclear bomb. And it's kind of like cracking a code a little bit. Like once you have that key, you can decipher the rest of the meaning of the book, because it's like, oh, now I see the parallels of like, this is the Allied forces, these are the Axis powers and stuff like that. And that's kind of, it's a little bit different, I would say, writing with a philosophy in mind, like a discussion point that you want to talk about, versus like, I'm going to give aliases to various political figures and basically be telling the story of something here, kind of one-to-one, and some reader can kind of decipher that and find that and be correct and be in discussion, be in true discussion with the author, versus kind of a broad philosophy that then can create messages that the reader can take away. I do think there's a bit of a difference there. I know for me, myself, I do write with philosophies a lot, and a lot of my work is in conversation with some sort of philosophy. And I do need to have that to write it.
But I think even if an author doesn't intend an allegory, people are going to find it either way.
Yes,
that's exactly.
We love finding allegories and patterns. Yeah. That's fun.
We seek meaning. It's fun. Just naturally, like we can't avoid doing it.
Yeah.
If it's Like if something happens in the house, if there's a noise, if the broom falls over and something comes out of the cupboard, we start saying like, "Oh, what was this?" and who used it, who went to sleep in that room, who lived in that room before we were here, and stuff. We're always finding
Yes.
meanings and things, and so narrative and stories are no different.
So one thing, because I thought about this a lot because, or back to Tolkien, we're gonna be Tolkien was actually the inspiration for this episode, so he will be coming up a lot.
Yeah.
But
Perfect.
so a lot of people talk about him or his books being about World War One and stuff, and I kind of had in my mind as well as like it has to be about that, right?
Surely.
But now like going back, I kind of think World War One was a big experience of his life. So surely I guess I would say the books aren't about World War One, but they're the filter through which he painted those books. Like
Yeah,
his storytelling comes through him who has experienced war and World War One specifically. So of course his battles, he's gonna have experience with which to write battle scenes, and everything's kind of gonna echo off of his own experience through that to some
Yeah.
extent.
I guess also when I'm just thinking about so where works come from informing it. Like if you think about the films of the 80s, like let's talk about Top Gun. I'm talking like American films. There's like a
Hmm.
real optimism to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything's good. We're going to beat the bad guys. Everything's going to be great forever. They're not about the 80s, but they kind of are about the 80s. Where
Hmm.
if you look at the films of 2000s and onward, and like it's bleak, man. Something
Uh,
changed, and something changed into society. So are they about the 2000s and global recessions and the never-ending wars in the West? Like, no, but they kind of are.
yeah,
So I
mm,
guess works are always sort of about where the author came from, whether or not they intend that or not. Like it just bleeds through.
hmm. And then again, we get into the discussion of like, there's like philosophy, there's the author's personal filter, their life experience, which is going to color the thing they're writing, versus like baking in a full hard allegory of like, I want to have a political discussion or some sort of discussion, and I'm going to just kind of reskin these key players here. And like,
Yep.
there is a slight difference. But that being said, um, I feel like there are degrees of allegory in this. There's like the kind of hard allegory, the one-to-one sort of like everything's we're talking in code basically.
Yep.
And then there are the kind of like softer allegories where it's like, I think this was
Yep.
what the character was going through. I think this is what the character took away at the end, messages and stuff like that.
Yeah. But soft allegories, I'm thinking like Animal Farm and Dune.
mm,
Like
Yeah,
are there exact one-to-ones? Not really, but you can see the real world parallels pretty clearly.
absolutely. In terms of what Lord of the Rings was about, Tolkien did give a little insight into his own ideology about this. He said, stories practically always, well, human stories, are practically always about one thing, aren't they? Death, the inevitability of death.
Oh, that's
ah,
not where I thought
So
you were going with that, huh?
interesting.
that's that's what Tolkien had. Some examples that I could think of slash looked into a little bit. Um, one personal experience recently was that my partner and I were watching Inventing Anna, which is a dramatized version of actual events that took place with a con artist. It's on Netflix. It was very good. We had a great time watching it. But there was this one scene where there was just this slight tonal difference, or there was one of the characters delivered or like divulged a piece of information, and the tone that I heard it through versus the tone my partner heard it through, something so subtle resulted in us having completely different interpretations of what
Ooh.
was really said in that scene. On one end, we had someone thinking the person that was being told this information was more or less I felt she was being more or less genuine, and the person she was speaking to had more autonomy in the situation versus my partner who thought no, she was fully manipulating him, he was fully manipulated in that moment. And it came down to these small little tonal differences in how we interpreted the main character delivering the information. And like, so something so small can create two divergent interpretations like that. Imagine thousands of people, millions of people reading an entire novel that's full of different things that can be interpreted
Yes.
so differently. Like
Yes.
we create, there's so many paths there, and we're gonna take it so differently.
Yes. I have kind of an example, kind of not, but you guys all know The Watchmen and Alan Moore. Have you heard about Alan Moore talk about the character of Rorschach
Yeah,
before?
I've heard this.
Yeah.
Yes,
No.
yes.
Okay. So I'm paraphrasing. Slight spoilers for The Watchmen. Not
Not
really.
really, yeah. It's
Anyway,
just kind of the character and how he comes across. Oh, I don't know. I don't
yeah.
know.
So there's
Yeah.
there's this character called Rorschach who I think Alan Moore kind of wrote him as like, well, if Batman was a real person, what would he be like? He'd be like this sour, brutal vigilante who thinks that all criminals are scum. Basically, like, he's a terrible person. It seems obvious to me, and James who's nodding, that Rorschach is a
Mhm.
terrible person. But apparently he had all these comic nerds coming to him because it was a graphic novel and saying like, Rorschach is me. Like you wrote this amazing character. He's a hero in this dark world, and he's brutal because he has to be. And thank you for writing that character. And
Wow.
I'm always thinking like, how do I get away from this person? This is not. I'm not comfortable with this. Like that is not who Rorschach is. But yeah, he doesn't own the character. It's out in the ether.
Yeah.
I love
Wow.
that example.
I think he tried to write him. He tried to write him. I think he made him impotent and he made him smell like piss all the time. And he tried to write him worse and worse and worse, so that people wouldn't connect
Yeah,
with the character, and people just kept
yeah.
connecting with the character.
I
Um,
know. I know. It's
Fascinating. Yeah.
quite remarkable.
I guess it's that mindset of like there is that mindset of like not recognizing why people would do crime and not recognizing why things happen, not looking at people with compassion, just looking at like the rules, the law, the justice, wanting there to be justice, and then a lack of power or authority within your own self, where you connect with these characters who go out and create justice themselves, but it's just they completely misinterpret an awful lot of what the character is meant to represent, or even what the character is connecting with what the character is saying. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
a fascinating example. I remember watching the film, and I really liked Rorschach, but I felt like he was
Yeah.
not as I just feel like he was changed from the comic books for the films. But
Oh, really? I thought he was just like the
right,
character in
okay.
the comic book. How
Yeah.
interesting.
I remember thinking he was kind of a dark, brooding, kind of violent character, and I was like, oh, that's the kind of cool character. But then I heard them.
Yeah, but obviously like deeply flawed and not admirable,
Oh yeah,
right?
not
Like
someone.
you can sympathize with him, but
Yeah, sympathize with him. But then I guess I kind of connected with the fact that he was the one who stuck to his laurels by the end of this. So like all of
yes.
the I liked that all of the Watchmen had their own flaws. Like none of them were perfect people, but then all of them kind of went like within the story. They kind of go back on what they all betrayed themselves in some way, whereas
Yep.
he didn't. I
No,
was like that was interesting as well. But then I heard
he
Alan
was the
Moore.
Cato.
Yeah. But then I heard Alan Moore talking about how the character was meant to come across in the comics and how he wanted him to be, and I'm like, oh god, yeah, I see that. That
Yeah.
was a real mind
And in
blow.
a risk of going on longer with this, when I was doing a bit of research for this, it seems like a lot of when you get stories that has a protagonist who is like violent and dark and doing dark stuff, it seems like there's often a subset of the audience that's like, fuck yeah, go that guy.
Mm.
Some
Like
people
Walter White, I think a lot of people interpreted him as heroic even to the end. He's
yeah,
like, go him, he's beating the system when I don't think that was the intention for Walter White.
no, yeah. Some people
Mm.
take it as almost licenses. Like, yeah, that's the way it should be, or that's the way we should go. And
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So moving on to some other examples here. Actually, just before we started recording the podcast, I threw the question out to the group, like if anyone had experience reading something or watching something and then later found out it was different. And Matan came back with the example of the road, what is it? The road not taken, the road less
Road
traveled.
Less Traveled?
Unless
Yes.
Yeah, by Robert Frost. And, everyone interprets it as a beautiful example of the prose of going your own way, marching to the beat of your own drum. But Matan gave some strong evidence as well as some articles suggesting that the author actually intended it more as sort of taking the piss of their friend's indecision, and how throughout the poem, apparently, good old Robert continues to repeat the phrase, the roads are the same. Not exactly in those words, but is suggesting that the roads that you're trying to choose between are ultimately the same. And that at the end they finish by saying that they will tell everyone they took the road less traveled, which does significantly change kind of how one reads what he's ultimately trying to say. I saw that Matan sent this through just before we started recording, so I haven't had time to read the article. But reader or listeners, if you're curious, definitely it's worth another look. If it's been a while since you've picked up good old Robert Frost's poem, maybe it's time to pick it up again.
I didn't have an example originally of a text that I read and misread from the author's meaning, but now I do, and it's that because I always read a really like dark and depressing tone from that. Like I thought it was like autumn and it's like the roads of life and the one you don't choose will be lost to you forever. I thought he was getting really melancholic, but it sounds like he's just taking the piss of someone. So I totally missed that.
Yeah.
I remember
Look at
doing
that.
school and them talking about the snow and them saying the snow means death and it's all about the choice.
Yeah.
Your life is two parts and which one did you take? And then it's just him taking the mickey out of his mate. It's gas. Like I know more than a few people who have Robert like the road less traveled tattooed on their arms or on their waist and stuff like that.
That makes it so much better. It's like all the people that call their kid Khaleesi after the final season of Game of Thrones is finished. It's like, oh.
Those people are all very much so waiting for the last book to come out. They're like, come on, George R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
Also, that wasn't the character's name, which was even funnier.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Khaleesi meant queen.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, but maybe they was calling their kid queen. I mean,
yes, of course.
That's true. Maybe Robert Frost was like, you know what? I'm gonna write a poem that later on English teachers are not gonna be able to resist lecturing on and on about to their students. Like, let's see what kind of honeypot I can set here for English teachers later on.
But if everyone misinterpreted the meaning and it's still regarded as this like great work with an incredible meaning, I mean that kind of says something interesting in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like its original meaning. It's not that it's not important, but it's important in a different way.
He inadvertently wrote something that really spoke to readers, and actually, I have some more words from Tolkien that will actually apply to this. So later on, not right now. We're gonna move on, but
I'll just throw something in there about
by all means.
Yeah, I was very lucky to be able to go to the Irish Limerick Writers Festival this weekend, and I got to see Irish writers speaking and talking about their works. And both Paul Muldoon, a wonderful Irish poet and author, and Paul Lynch, another great Irish author, they both spoke about the subconscious and how that your subconscious might kind of know what you're trying to say, even if you don't know exactly how to put it. Paul Muldoon particularly spoke about his poems, and he says that when he finishes his poems, he often doesn't know necessarily what they're about. He says he's trying to say two things are like two other things, but that might not be what other people interpreted, or those two things might not be what people read from it. And he was saying that he felt Shakespeare often did the same thing, and that he may not have necessarily known what he was saying about characters, but he subconsciously understood people, and that kind of came true in his writing. And they were saying that he called it not negative space, or kind of negative. So it was called something where like you're accidentally good, or something that meant that way. What you're not intentionally doing is still coming across in the writing, because you subconsciously understand what you're doing. And if you understand the ideas, or if you understand people, or if you understand the theme that you're trying to get across, even if it's not something you're intentionally putting into the story, that can come across and really uplift a piece of writing, and people can see that even if you didn't intend it.
I love that. There's something almost like kind of mystical about that, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. Robert Frost could have been thinking he was taking the mickey out of his friend, but in reality, like, he didn't realize that subconsciously, he's giving his friend a hard time, but in reality, he was just jealous of his friend actually taking his time to weigh the decision. Yeah. And he actually does desire the road less traveled, and that ended up being the poem that he wrote without him realizing it. He was revealing his own psyche.
Maybe that poem is the lesson his friend needed to learn to be less decisive, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. More decisive, you mean? Or less decisive?
Sorry, to be less indecisive.
Oh, less indecisive, yeah.
Robert Frost is listening. Take notes.
Yeah, Robert Frost, one of our dear listeners. No, thank you, Robert Frost, for your contribution. I felt like I didn't want to fully just drag him and stuff like that. Like, he did So
Yeah.
it felt,
I don't think
felt
it's a I don't
sacrilegious.
think it's a drag if like if you write a
True.
story to like take the piss out of one of your friends and it ends up being like one of the greatest poems in like that was just him on a 20% day, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? In English class
Uh,
for a
I love
generation.
that.
As well as now, like many years later, he's like, finally, people are talking. People finally, people are laughing. They get the joke.
Yeah.
Get it, yeah.
Yeah. I gotta say that's also pretty bold to like go out and say like, nah, you're all wrong. And not
Yeah.
to just take the win of like, yep,
Yes,
that's what it's about. That's the work.
What
Very
do
humble.
you both think Star Wars was about?
I mean, who cares? That's harsh.
I
I
for the
enjoyed Star Wars,
sake
but
for the sake of the
Best critical
I
podcast,
analysis.
mean,
Best
I
critical
care,
analysis
Paddy.
ever.
For the sake of the discussion,
is there
I
something
don't.
deep at
I love that.
is there something deep at the heart of Star Wars? I suspect not.
Oh my God. Um,
Good versus evil.
God, I love that. Star Wars, I felt like, I don't know, Star Wars was kind of like just pulling Dune and Lord of the Rings. Was it Lord of the Rings?
Uh,
The
there
Game
was
of Thrones.
Hidden Fortress by Kurosawa.
All right. I remember Lucas saying it was too. Anyway, no,
I've heard it's a
never mind.
retelling of the Hidden Fortress, but I haven't seen the Hidden Fortress, so I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
So, like, I guess. Well, okay.
What do you think it was
Inspirations aside, do you think
Yeah.
there's an allegory there? Do you think he's telling
mean,
the story?
I saw an allegory for Buddhism, but that would be the kind of thing that I would
Oh,
see in
yeah.
a story like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But he definitely drew inspiration, I think. An
Mhm.
allegory?
Maybe not an allegory. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, no, I can say it. But I mean, what's
So-
allegory and what's just like, I mean, plundering sounds harsh, but what's allegory and what's just like, I'll take this because it's cool. I'll take this because it's cool. I don't know that he had anything to say about it, you know?
So Star Wars actually does have a pretty firm allegory that apparently George Lucas was trying to be in conversation with that I had no idea about. But a very tight allegory to the Vietnam War, where the
Oh,
rebels were
Yeah.
actually very closely associated with the Viet
Viet
Cong
Cong.
and the Empire, the US. And
Huh.
there's an interview, there's a whole discussion between George Lucas and James Cameron where George Lucas is talking about this stuff. I didn't find where he said this exact quote, but I saw multiple sources quoting him as saying it was really about the Vietnam War, and that was the period where Nixon was trying to run for a second term, which got me thinking historically about how do democracies get turned into dictatorships? Because the democracies aren't overthrown, they're given away.
Was he
Um,
intending for that allegory to be transparent? Like, were we supposed to pick up on that?
I I don't fully know, but it was
Hmm.
at the very least it
Hmm.
was like what he very much so had in mind at the time.
I had heard him speaking about that with regards to the Wookiees or the planet where they're the jungle planet where they're kind of rebel attacks.
Hmm.
I hadn't
Mhm.
realized it was the whole series or the whole trilogy.
Yeah.
Interesting that he was having that conversation with James Cameron because James Cameron was quite open about aliens being an allegory for Vietnam as well. But I think that was
Really?
kind of yes, yeah. I
So
think it
are
was,
the aliens the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese?
yeah, and I think I think
Oh.
the yeah, like the soldiers coming in all gung ho, and the helmets are covered in kind of Vietnam.
Yeah.
So I think
That makes sense. And they're all full
of
of bravado and everything, and they get there and they realize like, oh, we can't do this.
kind of meant to
Oh,
represent
interesting.
the kind of
Yeah.
American overconfidence and kind of that they went into
And
Vietnam.
then the Viet Cong lay eggs in your brain.
Yeah.
It breaks down after a point.
It doesn't
It's not
hold through the whole film. Like,
Yeah, no.
it's not a perfect metaphor.
Interesting. Okay.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. But again, I like the, like you said, Paddy, who cares? Like at the same time, there is that line of who cares versus yeah, there was something intended. Do you need to know that that was his inspiration to enjoy the movie and pull whatever you need, whatever you want from it? No.
Yeah. I mean,
I only
some
found that
works
out
more than
recently.
others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't really
Yeah.
change the film at all.
I just mean I think there's some works that really warrant a closer examination of the text and some that I mean you can, but that's not necessary. Star Wars is good for just being Star Wars. I don't think it needs
Mm.
depth to Whereas, Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really cool literary power couple, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, who were friends back in the day.
Were they?
They were.
Oh, I love that.
But Tolkien was notoriously Catholic. Just a quick little like a comparison here. Tolkien was really Catholic, and everyone says like, oh, his works are like heavily laden with Catholicism and that sort of stuff. There is one character who I think is a very strong parallel to Jesus, but it's debatable versus his friend C.S. Lewis, who is known for putting very strong Christian parallels in his stories, kind of more overtly and more strongly putting an allegory in, versus Tolkien may have used influences, but he was actually very anti-allegory. He really doesn't like allegorical works, from what I saw. Like he's very not about it. Do either of you, off of that, think there are any takeaways for new writers or things to keep in mind for new writers, with regard to allegory or things that are allegory-esque, things that I guess a reader might experience while reading something that they then try to recreate in their writing, but kind of they do it like a reader and not like a writer, which there is a difference that I see. But I want to see if you...
Could you say that again?
Like, any advice for new writers who maybe have just been readers up until this point, like any pitfalls to watch out for with their writing? Because sometimes I know that there are a number of things that new writers will try to do in their writing, which I feel come very much so from a reader mentality. Things that they're experiencing in their mind that they don't realize aren't actually on the page. And so when they try to recreate it, there are some sort of pitfalls.
It's real tricky because, you want to say don't be too heavy-handed, but then if it's meant that the allegory should be picked up, it might go unnoticed. And then you want to be like, don't be too subtle, but an overly heavy-handed metaphor might feel really clumsy. Allegory, sorry. So this is a long way of saying not really. I don't know, because like Animal Farm, it seems so directly allegorical, like, and if it wasn't so well written, it might be like almost too much. Like, yeah, we get it, dude. This is the Soviet Union, but I don't know. The only thing I'd say is like, if you have a particular allegory that you want to come across, get beta readers and just make sure that early audiences understand what you're trying to do and that it isn't too obvious. I don't know. What do you think, James?
I guess I'm thinking that if you have an allegory that you really care about, that's like something you want to be in a story, or even the story is a vehicle for expressing that, I think that's probably a really good way of you keeping to a little bit of a structure, even if it's just a structure in your own mind. It might not be a specific writing structure. It's something that you say, I want it to be this, this, and then this. I think that's great, if that's your way of writing. But I don't think you should, I don't think your effort with the story should be to try to get that to come across. I think if it comes across, that's great, and if it doesn't come across, it doesn't hurt the story if the story is still a good story. I'm going to borrow a piece of advice that I heard from Claire Keegan, which is that what you should be trying to do is to just write something that is just good enough and just makes sense and is just clear and has a beginning, middle, and end, has a structure that people can follow. And that kind of more complicated stuff like symbolism and allegory, that should kind of take a back seat. If you're an early writer and you're trying to get that thing first, try to get that first and then try to work on putting the allegories into it, or have the allegories come across, because that's kind of not that it's, in a sense, it can be a little bit of it can be a little bit of a, not showy offy, but it can be a little bit of a, can be a little bit overbearing. It can be a little bit kind of, look how fancy this is. And if you have that element of it without the clarity, the story, it'll hurt the story an awful lot. So if you can get the clarity first, and then either the meaning will bleed through or not bleed through, because like so many of these authors have said, their stories are misinterpreted, and they're, what they had intended to say isn't what was interpreted. So don't try to break your neck trying to get your allegory across.
I suppose then if nothing else, the story is a good story.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And if it's a good story, people will draw meaning from it, and people will think it's about, life that you choose, paths that you choose in life, when it isn't necessarily intended as
Yes.
that.
Yes. Yes.
People will get what they need from it, really, like wherever
Yes.
they are in life. And or James, you were just talking about how you reread Metamorphosis, I think it's,
Oh
or
yeah.
Mm.
and you
Yes,
just got
Mm.
you your readings were fully different based
completely
on where you
different.
were. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, that's
100%.
interesting. So,
Yeah.
can you tell us more about that? Because I love Metamorphosis. That's like one of my favorite works.
I guess I'd read it when I was probably a teenager, and I just read it
Yeah.
as just it's a weird story where someone turns into an insect and bad things happen to him, and yeah, I thought it was very good and I thought it was very weird. And now, just years later, from having worked in care and having seen, the so some unfortunate things that happen when families are
Yeah.
placed in positions of having to care for people, and the feelings that people have as a result of being cared for and feeling like they're a burden, either from age, sickness, or mental health. And then the unfortunate, so on the one hand, that side, like the experience of the person who needs to be cared for. And then on the other side, the different ways that people respond to having to take care of that person, and how there can be resentment and how there can be different things coming across. I reread it and I was like, this is such an insightful and profound, very short story. Like, it's so tight, but it gets across so much of that complicated, very universal experience. And it's a wonderful, wonderful like piece of writing. Like, it starts off with such an absurd premise, but then grounds it so very quickly, and then tells a really, really powerful, impactful story.
Yeah. Yeah. It's real dark. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's totally an example of work where if you don't, yeah, cool, it's a story about a cool bug, but there is so much more there, and it would be a
Mm,
shame to not get that meaning because, yeah, it's powerful and it's
yes.
such a bummer story.
That's tragic.
It gives
I
you the
Absolutely
want to
bad
read
tragic.
feels
it
so
now.
strongly. Yeah.
Oh, it's very
Yeah.
good. Yeah, it's very, very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even just his writing is very good. That came up there over the weekend as well. I think someone was saying, I think it might have been Paul Lynch was saying, I think the second line of the story is about the character. He wakes up and he's an insect. And then the second line is that he tries to pull his sheet over himself because he's cold, and he's struggling to do it because his legs and his body is different. And he said it was just such a grounding line. It just felt so real that it
Wow.
immediately makes you accept the premise of the
Wow.
previous sentence. And
Yeah.
you just go along for the ride because you're like, okay, this person is an insect, but this isn't going to be about them doing hectic things. It's just going to be about them trying to deal with that the way a
Wow.
person would deal with that. And his first response is to just, oh, fuck this, pull the blanket
Yeah.
over himself
And his next
Wow.
response is
ignore the
like, "Oh
problem.
shit, I need to go to work." Which
Yes,
is so
yes.
darkly funny.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
How do
I gotta
Yeah.
read this.
Yeah.
Is
That's
it
very
it's
good.
a no, novella, novel, short story?
It's
What is it?
super short. Yeah, I'd say novella, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
It's,
Yeah,
it's
totally
not a
novella.
full novel. It's very short. You'd read it in
Mm.
2 brief sittings, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Some things that I see readers fall into, and they're allegorical pitfalls, but also just they're also kind of allegory adjacent slash things that felt related in terms of readers creating meaning in their mind that they then it's like mechanically trying to create something that they created organically, which readers organically create things all the time while reading something, and then they try to create that kind of mechanically, not realizing that the way you create that is not necessarily how you like the way you read it. And one example of that is new writers will often try to be very didactic in terms of like they will just tell you what like and then so and so learned not to do that and stuff. Whereas like you really want to try to avoid being a didactic and just straight up just talking directly to the reader. This was the lesson. And when I say like should or you don't want to do that, obviously, rules of writing are mostly our own and you can ultimately do what you want. But the reason we ultimately try to do that is because it tends to be a symptom of a bit of a health check for the story. It tends to be a symptom of a story that's not very healthy because readers should be arriving at their own conclusions or your conclusion just by the events of the story. So if you're kind of arriving at the end of the story and you need to tell the reader, and so and so learned X, then maybe that didn't come across well enough throughout the events of the story, and you need to go back and there's a structural change that needs to happen where we should be experiencing this lesson through the character's journey, as opposed to needing to be needing just reading something and then having the author need to tell us what it was about at the end. And I find a lot of new writers will be a bit, yeah, kind of heavy-handed, didactic, and just straight up telling you what the character's takeaway was and what they learned. And I think it comes from this fact that we do, when we read something, we take away meaning. But when you go back and read a lot of really good pieces of literature, nowhere does the author tell you, and then so and so learned this, and this was the message, and this is the takeaway. They don't, that was all you that took that away. And so you really need to realize what the difference between what you're taking away and what the author actually did to facilitate you taking that away. And that's kind of the process of becoming a better writer, I feel, is kind of learning to separate the two and what ingredients create what reactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to all the best kind of like morality stories, or like like the story of the scorpion and the frog, like the frog giving the scorpion a lift on its back. Like you don't
Mm.
need to hear what it's about. It
Yeah.
just it illustrates it perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of micro incidences of this is a lot of people will explain character intention exactly, as in like this happened and the character felt bad about it, or or the character felt confused and or they said something valiantly, like really putting the adjective right in there to tell you the exact tone of how it was said and how it was done. And there are times to give very direct interiority about what a character's feeling and stuff like that. Mostly I see it in dialogue and mostly, or in attributions. People will say, give a piece of dialogue and then say, they said, yeah, valiantly, or they said
Yeah.
gravely, but with a twinkle of like friendship in their eye or something to really spell out the exact flavor of what the dialogue was meant to be,
Yeah.
how the dialogue was meant to be interpreted. And what I tell to new writers a lot of the time is just use said or a very simple attribution. And I want, like, I'll tell them, like, if your character is yelling, I don't want an exclamation mark and for you to tell me they yelled it. I want to hear the person yelling without you telling me they yelled. And the yelling and the emotion of the conversation is instead created through the context of what's being said, the tension and the tone. And if you capture all of those things, you don't need to tell the reader how to interpret the dialogue. They will just hear the voices in their head. They'll hear the heat of the conversation. Try to capture it in the tone and the tension of the moment and not in you needing to tell the reader how each line was delivered, like exactly. And again, that's something that I find new writers will do because, again, you have this experience of reading an exchange where you hear the yelling, you hear the passion, you hear all that. So when you go to then write that, the impulse is to tell the reader they yelled this. And then they put 12, like 10, I won't be as hyperbolic. They'll put three exclamation marks. And as an editor, I will take all of those exclamation marks away in more cases than, in
When
more instances than not.
when do you permit an exclamation mark? Because I'm thinking now to the new anthology story I've written. There's a lot of italics and there's a lot of exclamation marks.
I do
Only
permit
ever
them.
one at a time. Don't do more than
Yeah.
one exclamation mark
Oh
in a
yeah,
row.
that I
But
will automatically reduce that to unless there are cases. It's not every time, but 99% of the time, if there's more than one exclamation point, I'll make it one. And 95, I will let the author keep usually about 5% of their exclamation marks.
mm, I'll have fun with my story when you get to it, I guess.
Uh,
I hope the
And
italics makes it, but I don't think it will.
And I will say, like, when I say I let the author keep 5% of their exclamation marks, that's not a blanket rule that I go and I'm like, all right, they get 5% of these. No, but I just find in editing and in trying to get the focus on the tone and get the focus where it needs to be to kind of, elevate certain scenes and things like that, what tends to happen is that they're left with about 5% of their exclamation marks. A lot of them aren't needed. But I'm not there to just kill them. I do actually, sometimes there is one where I'm like, yep, I like that one there. I'll keep it. Like, but it's the whole thing of, I mean, exclamation marks specifically. It's the whole topic of less is more. Like, if you pull back the number of exclamation
Mm.
marks and capture are effectively communicating your tone and the character's like presence in the moment, then you don't need the exclamation marks. And then on top of that, when you do finally put one in, it's gonna hit like so much harder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They're kind of like a labor saving thing. That if you put yourself in the mindset of like, what if I was going to take out as many as I could? How would you change the way a sentence is written, or how would you change the way
Absolutely.
the page looks to
Yeah.
get it? Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing, I think Matan's talked about this before, just a fun reader interpretation versus authors, the written practice, um, is like the way time and space is warped in writing, where sometimes it feels like a large stretch of time has gone by and we've transitioned through a lot of things. But when you look at the amount of page space you've actually gone through, it's very, very little. Maybe sometimes just you've just read a paragraph and you feel like you're in a vastly different place and that a lot has happened. But actually, very little time on the page was spent to accomplish
Mm.
that. And so new writers might fall into the trap of feeling like they need to write multiple
Yeah.
paragraphs of time to
Yeah.
fill
Yeah.
a space when in reality they don't.
They got into the car and they drove over the rolling hills and they went to this city and they went to this city and like no,
hmm
it's the
No.
amount of space the page does not have to equal the amount of time that's passing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hilary Mantel does this so well. Like later at Wolf Hall, it's like, oh, all right. Guess they just left and got there, but
They're there
that's all
now.
it needs. Yeah.
Back to the good part. Back to what's necessary. Like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is what we're focusing on. And what one cool little exercise some you can do at home if you want is just when you're reading, next time you're reading, when you turn the page, when you get to the or right before you turn the page, reflect on or just see where you are just before you turn the page, and then look to the top left corner of where you were when you first turned the page, and just look at how much has transpired between the start of your last page turn to right before you made your page turn.
Hmm.
Sometimes I know for me, sometimes I have an experience where I look back at where I started that page turn. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was all the way back there when I first turned the page, like just in this one page turn. The character didn't even know about X, Y, and Z yet. They hadn't, like, sometimes a lot happens in a very short amount of space. And it's worth paying attention to.
I really like that
I,
advice.
a piece of advice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have read stuff where like you're doing editing and someone will have a paragraph where a character walks into a room and they see something and have an emotional response, and then see something else and there's an emotional response, see something else, emotional response. It might be a
Mm,
paragraph, it might be two paragraphs, but nothing's happened. They've
mm,
been in the room experiencing things, and there's no reaction to anything. There's
yeah.
nothing's happening. The story isn't moving forwards. And like that really, I find that really drags. Like you need to try to pick what's the important one in here, just have that happen and then get them moving, and find an excuse for the other things that happen if they're necessary, but have the character respond to their emotions. Don't have the character see something, feel something, and then see something else and feel something else. Have them respond to their own emotions and move
Mhm.
through space in some way.
And just kind of, again, these are kind of allegory adjacent or like within the realm of kind of what's going on with allegories. But the cool thing about kind of pulling information back and more than just with exclamation marks, I'll tell writers that less is more with attributions and things like this, but it also applies to allegories and application because a lot of the time, if you actually pull back some of the information, you leave more space for the reader to fill in the blanks with themselves. And by doing that, by actually giving the reader a little bit less at times, sometimes you make it more engaging because they'll see more of themselves in it. There's more space for them to kind of fill in the pages. And that happens, that's with allegory and application. That's what's going on.
Agreed.
Well, anyway, I think we'll leave it there for discussion for this one. Leave a comment what allegories or or applications, what messages you've taken away from this podcast. What were we actually talking about during this episode? Was this actually just all one reskin of some big political debate currently going on in the world? I don't know. What's
Was
your
it?
interpretation? Was
Was
it?
it?
I don't know. So leave a comment on what you think this podcast meant. If you'd like to see us in other realms apart from just the podcast realm, we don't just talk about writing, we do write as well. We have an anthology out called The New Mythic. Soon to be the old Mythic, because we're currently working on a new Mythic, a new anthology that we'll be putting out sometime in the near adjacent future. But anyway, the new Mythic is out. We do have some great stories there for you to read. Each author contributed a story, vastly different worlds, exploring different things. Do they have allegories? I don't know. You'll have to read and find out. See, if you have read it, it'd be great if you could give a review on Goodreads. If you'd enjoyed this conversation, if you could give a review of this podcast as well, that'd be great. Share it with a friend. That'd be great as well. We do also release these podcasts on YouTube. So if you want to see our beautiful faces while we talk to you, that's available to you. And then, yeah, if you do leave a comment anywhere, well, yeah, go ahead and do it. We'll give you a shout on the show because we like talking to the people that also like talking about this. So, yeah, reach out, join the conversation. That'd be very fun. Thank you once again for listening. I do have a quote here, one last quote from the man, the myth, the legend, J.R.R. Tolkien. He said, "Of course, the more life a story has, the more readily will it be susceptible of allegorical interpretations. While the better a deliberate allegory is made, the more nearly will it be acceptable as just a story." So there you go. Leaning deep into both ends. At the end of the day, you might just get a story. James, what are the... Oh, wait, no, Paddy. I got mixed up because your changes on my screen. Your positions on my screen have shifted. Paddy, what are the pros of allegories and stories?
Look, man, that's a deep one. Editor, cut.
5, 4,
Okay.
3.
Exploration of a real world topic from a direction that isn't normally explored. That's what I'm gonna say. That's what I'm gonna say. Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like it
was
means something.
That was a
Yeah.
good
Does
answer.
it? Thank you.
Like digging when everyone else is jumping, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
James, what are the cons of allegories and stories?
Sometimes the author's intention was garbage.
Yep. Yep. There it is. All right. Thank you all for listening. See you later.
You're listening to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.